Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Shekalim. We are up to Perek Bet, Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilum Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbayev, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. The following Mishnah discusses a number of cases in which a person uses money designated for some other purpose to fulfill his shekel obligation. The first two cases involve Me'ilah, the prohibition to use consecrated property for one's personal benefit or any other secular use. For example, if a person repays a loan with temple funds that are in his possession, he is guilty of Me'ilah. If he does so by mistake, the Torah requires him to bring an Asham offering as an atonement, as well as to pay the temple the value of the benefit he received, plus an additional fifth, as the Torah writes in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 5, Psukim 15 and 16. If he did so deliberately, he receives lashes in addition to repaying what he took, but he does not bring an Asham or add a fifth. The Mishnah discusses the laws of Me'ilah as it relates to Shekalim. Hanoten shiklo lechavero lishkol al yado. If someone gives his shekel to his friend to act as his agent to contribute it to the temple for him. Now the Mishnah is referring to a case where the person did not consecrate this coin as his shekel before giving it to his agent. Had he done so, the shekel would be immediately consecrated and subject to Me'ilah. Rather, he gave the agent an ordinary unconsecrated coin, intending for it to become consecrated only when the temple acquires it. And the agent went and contributed it for himself instead. For example, he mistakenly thought it was his own coin that he was contributing to the temple. If at the time he contributed this shekel, the tirumah had already been withdrawn from the temple chamber, so that the friend's shekel was already considered temple property, like we explained in yesterday's Mishnah, the tirumah is taken on behalf of all the shekalim, even those that have not yet arrived at the temple. So the withdrawal of the tirumah acquires for the temple all of the shekalim that are still in transit. So in that case, the agent has committed Me'ilah by using consecrated property, his friend's shekel, for his own benefit. Now the friend's shekel became consecrated as soon as the temple acquired it. The agent benefited from it by paying it to the temple, because now he saves his own property from being seized by the courts to pay for his shekel. If, however, the tirumah had not yet been withdrawn when the agent contributed the friend's shekel for himself, then the agent has not committed Me'ilah, since the shekel was not yet considered temple property. He is merely required to repay his friend for the shekel he took, as the Rambam writes in Chut Shekalim, chapter 3, Alachat 10. The Mishnah continues with a second case of money designated for a holy purpose being used to pay the shekel obligation. Hashokel sheklo mimeot hekdesh. One who contributes his shekel from temple funds, meaning he forgot that he had previously consecrated this coin to the fund for the upkeep of the temple. Now the money in this fund is used to pay for the repairs to the temple, bedek habayit, rather than for sacrificial offerings, because people would donate money or property to this fund to be used for this purpose. This money was considered consecrated even though it was not designated for the altar. Now if he took that coin that he intended to give, the coin that he consecrated to the fund for the upkeep of the temple, and he used it to pay shekel obligation, then later when the tirumah is withdrawn from the temple chamber and an animal bought from those tirumah funds is offered on the altar ma'al, the contributor has committed Me'ilah. Although Me'ilah generally occurs as soon as a person removes a consecrated item from the possession of the temple and uses it for himself, here the shekel was not removed from the possession of the temple. It was merely shifted from one holy purpose to another. Now a shekel consecrated to the temple upkeep fund was used to buy communal offerings. That's why it's a problem, because the shekel that was given to the upkeep fund was used to buy communal offerings. Now the rule in such cases is that Me'ilah does not take effect until the money is actually used for that other purpose. Therefore, only after an animal is purchased with shekalim funds and offered on the altar is he guilty of Me'ilah. Now, even if the shekel he gave was not actually used to buy the offering, since the tirumah is taken and spent on behalf of everyone who gives a shekel, it is considered as if his money went to buy the offering. Now, the same is actually true in the first case of the Mishnah as well. There too, the friend's shekel was not removed from the possession of the temple. It was merely used by the agent to pay his own shekel obligation, where it continued to be part of the temple fund. Therefore, the Mishnah's ruling here applies in that case as well. In that case too, the agent is not actually guilty of me'ilah until an animal is bought and offered from the withdrawn funds, as the Rav explains. A third case of a shekel being paid from money sanctified for another purpose is mentioned by the Mishnah now. Midme maaser sheni midme shvi'it. If one paid his shekel with maaser sheni funds or with shmita funds, and then he realized his mistake, but just to explain, in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, Maaser Sheni, a second tithe, is separated from the produce of the land of Israel. This tithe is taken to Yerushalayim and eaten there. If it's too difficult to transport the tithe, it may be redeemed, and the money is then taken to Yerushalayim and spent on food that is eaten there, as the Torah writes in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 14, Sukkim 22 through 26. These Maaser Sheni funds acquire all the holiness and restrictions of the Maaser Sheni itself. Likewise, money used to buy produce that grows during the Shemitah year, Shemitah funds, becomes sanctified with Shemitah sanctity. Maaser Sheni and Shemitah funds may not be used for the shekel contribution for two reasons, the commentary writes. Number one, these funds must be used to buy food for human consumption, while the Shekalim go to buy offerings that are burnt on the altar. And number two, the shekel contribution is an obligation, and obligations must be paid out of unconsecrated funds, as taught in Mishnah Masechet Menachot, chapter 7, Mishnah 6. So again, the Mishnah says, if one paid his shekel with Maaser Sheni funds or with Shemitah funds, and then he realized his mistake, yochal kenegdan. He must eat food of a corresponding value to them, meaning he does this by taking a shekel of unconsecrated money and declaring, let the Maaser Sheni funds or the Shemitah funds, wherever they may be right now, be redeemed onto this money. He must do this in order that the Maaser Sheni or Shemitah funds not be used to buy offerings and instead be used for their proper purpose. This removes the Maaser Sheni or Shemitah sanctity from the money he gave for Shekalim and transfers it to the new money. He then uses the new money to buy food, which he treats with the sanctity of Maaser Sheni or Shemitah produce. Once the sanctity of Maaser Sheni or Shemitah has been removed from the funds that were used, they now automatically fulfill his obligation of the shekel payment. And that is in Rabotai Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel now discusses the law when more than the required shekel was set aside to pay the obligation. Hamchanes Ma'ot, one who puts aside small coins over a period of time for a shekel obligation. The Rav explains, being poor, chas v'shalom, he saves a few small coins at a time toward a shekel contribution. V'amar harei elu mishkali, and he says at the time he begins saving them, let these be consecrated for my shekel obligation. But when the time of the shekel contribution arrives, he finds that he mistakenly collected more than a shekel's worth of coins. Bet Shammai amrim motara nedava. Bet Shammai say, the surplus of money, the extra money, remains hekdesh, even though he consecrated it in error, and it goes to the collection chest set up in the temple for voluntary communal offerings. Now the commentators explain Bet Shammai are consistent with their opinion in Nazir chapter 5 Mishnah 1 that hekdesh b'taut shmeh hekdesh, a consecration made in error is nonetheless a valid consecration. Now Bet Shammai learned this opinion, they derived their opinion from a pasuk as explained by the Gemara in Nazir there. Now Bet Shammai say that the extra money will go to the collection chest set up for voluntary communal offerings. Now there are 6 such collection chests set up in the temple. They are discussed in chapter 6. Funds from these chests went to purchase olah offerings to be made on the altar at times when there were few offerings to be brought. These offerings were not a communal obligation, rather voluntary. That's why it was written voluntary on the chest. Even though according to Bet Shammai the extra money is also consecrated toward the shekel obligation, it cannot go to the general shekel fund, since it's forbidden for a person to contribute more than 1 shekel, as the Torah states, "Hey ashir lo yarbeh," a rich man may not give more than a shekel in Sefer Shemot, chapter 30, pasuk 15. The excess money therefore goes to purchase voluntary communal offerings, as do certain other types of surplus communal hekdesh money. Bet Hillel omrim motaran chulin, but Bet Hillel say the surplus of the money is unconsecrated. Any money over a shekel is not hekdesh, since he only had in mind to consecrate up to a shekel's worth of coins, and all the coins in excess of a shekel were set aside by mistake. Shavi men shikli. But if at the time he began putting aside coins, he said that he was doing so in order that I will bring my shekel from them, as opposed to let these be consecrated for my shekel obligation, he says, I will bring my shekel from them. Shavin shemotaran chulin. then all agree that the surplus of the money is unconsecrated. Even in this case, Bet Shammai agreed that it is as if he said explicitly, right? If he says, Avi man shikli, I will bring my shekel from them, Shavin shemutaran chulin. Even Bet Shammai agreed that it is as if he said explicitly that if he ends up with more than a shekel's worth of coins, he wants only a shekel's worth to be hektish and not the rest. Because again, in the beginning, the first case of the Mishnah was he said, Hare elu lishikli. These are consecrated for my shekel obligation. There's a dispute between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. What's with the extras? But here he said, Avi men shikli. I'm setting them aside that I will bring my shekel from them. So everyone agrees that if he ends up with more than a shekel's worth of coins, he wants only a shekel's worth to be ekdish and not the rest. And the Mishnah continues with a similar set of cases regarding a different type of obligation. If someone saves up coins to purchase an animal for a chatat offering and says at the time he began saving them, let these be for buying the chatat offering that I am obligated to bring. He previously committed a sin that required him to bring a chatat offering as an atonement, and when he buys the animal, he discovers that he has more money than he needs. Shavin shamotan nedava. Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel agree that the surplus of the money remains consecrated and is used for voluntary communal offerings. In this case, Bet Hillel agree that the extra coins remain consecrated, and the next Mishnah will explain the difference between this case and the first case of the Mishnah where Bet Hillel hold that the surplus of coins is unconsecrated. That we will discuss B'ezrat Hashem B'li Neder tomorrow. But let us continue. She'avi men chatat, but if when he began setting aside the coins, he said that he is doing so in order that I will bring a chatat from them, Shavin shamota chulin. All agree that the remainder of money over the animal's worth is unconsecrated, like in the previous case of the Mishnah. By saying he will bring the offering from these coins, it is as if he explicitly consecrates only the coins up to the animal's value. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.